Striving to be the best, leading a team of winners, meeting your goals. These characteristics are indicative of a good boss. But what is emotional intelligence in a leader? Is it humility, understanding, kindness? Well, joining us now is Chris Connors, executive coach and best-selling author of Emotional Intelligence for the Modern Leader. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Layla. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. You coach, you write fast books. What was your inspiration behind talking about emotional intelligence? What is that?
Really, the combining personally and professionally, a lot of what my journey's been. My business background was in management consulting, and I saw how much EQ, in addition to IQ, really matters in the workforce and impacts leadership, both in my personal life and professionally. It was really understanding things like empathy, self-awareness, adaptability, and understanding why they matter, but then putting that into action. So, my goal in writing a book like this was to focus less on the theory to some degree and more on the practicality of how do we start to use these things to our advantage.
Right. So what would you say that most leaders in a position of either fronting a corporation, a small business, what would you say that they're lacking right now, that maybe their thinking is a little old school?
Sure. Well, I think that the crisis in the last couple of months has done a lot to sharpen leaders around how important empathy is. So I think that while empathy may not necessarily be lacking in some organizations, it's how do you amplify that? And ironically, I think what matters most right now is being able to connect with people, even in a virtual environment, perhaps more than leaders did earlier when they were just there to interface person to person. So leading with empathy, a great role model for that is Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, Sarah Blakely, the founder and CEO of Spanx, two people that just have a profound ability to connect with their employees, not just with the customers, but with their employees, and to show that personal side of themselves, that vulnerability, showing that they care, recognizing all the things that are going on right now in the crisis and how to touch people and help them to develop personally and professionally.
And what kind of an impact does that have on employees? Obviously, it certainly makes them feel more secure, but what would you say that sort of application then renders in terms of productiveness?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that. One of my favorite quotes is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that as a leader, when you're able to identify and connect with someone in a very real and emotional way, you're letting those people know, I care about you. And so companies and a lot of businesses now, what we've heard in the last couple of years is how important, recognition and rewards programs are. What better way to recognize somebody than to personally invest in them, to understand more about who they are, to get to know them, but also to play a role in their professional development and letting them know that we don't just want you here to maybe just complete this job. We want you here for the long haul to help not just you grow, but us grow as an organization and to improve the culture.
But how does that apply to kind of today's working world, and especially with millennials and the younger set, because it seems like their careers are very transient now. So it seems to be that there's less people staying in one position or with one company for the duration of their careers the way we used to see it a couple of decades ago, even before my lifetime.
Yeah, I think companies that build cultures around really strong values, so things like honesty, integrity, mixing in some of those parts of emotional intelligence, having an empathetic culture, letting employees know that they're valued and that the values of the company are going to dictate the actions, making an investment in diversity and inclusion, and having active conversations. Could just be lunch hour, meetings and things like that to get ideas, soliciting ideas. And not just being a leader that leads strictly from the top down, but being somebody that has more of a flat organizational structure to elevate voices from all across the organization. I think when people feel that they belong and that their voice is being heard, they're going to want to be a part of that culture. And while, sure, individuals are going to look to further their best interests, no question about it, when you create a more inclusive culture that is involving everybody, I think what that does, and what a lot of studies and research show, is that people want to be a part of that. They sense that connection And that's where empathy matters. And even from a self-awareness standpoint, you're recognizing, hey, I'm a part of something bigger than just myself.
That is true. I have to say, working with some leaders in my line of work, when they're not the smartest person in the room, that's when you really see everybody's skills and talents shine, and when you really do feel a part of something. Well, this is a good place to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk more about your book and some of the work that you do out in the field. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been chatting with Chris Connors, executive coach and best-selling author of Emotional Intelligence for the Modern Leader. And we've been talking about how you call it EQ is just as important as IQ. And as far as leadership is concerned, empathy does go a long way. Want to talk a little bit more about your book. So tell us what's in those pages and how can leaders pick that up and learn to be a better leader for the future?
Sure. So it really is meant to be a practical how-to guide of how to use emotional intelligence to your advantage. I think authors like Daniel Goleman, Brene Brown, Dr. Travis Bradberry have done a really great job of providing that structure for what EQ is. And I do some of that in the book, but a lot of it is just how do you start to use it to your advantage. So I highlight some examples of great leaders. I think I referenced earlier Sarah Blakely, Tyler Perry, and then I also talk about the head basketball coach of the Boston Celtics, Brad Stevens, as examples of really great EQ leaders. And then from there, it blends into the 5 core parts of empathy, self-awareness, self-management, motivation, and self-awareness. And so really getting into the core parts of it, talking about the different types of emotionally intelligent leadership styles, and then really how you build a thriving culture within your organization. And the book has a lot of great assessments and exercises for that how-to part of it that you can use on your own.
What is one of the first things that when you're assessing a leader in that particular role, in that particular company, that you notice that maybe across the board there are similarities and that's something that you need to change or that you'd like to see changed?
Yeah, well, I 4 months ago, I would have said adaptability, and we all know what's happened with changing with COVID. I think now the interesting positive that comes from everything that's just happened is that adaptability is front and center, knowing when to change, knowing when to stay the course with what you're doing. So when something is successful and going well, of course, you want to keep that on, but kind of having that plan for what happens next. And I think now what we're starting to see is that a lot of leaders are planning for that more than just a rainy day, more like a thunderstorm. But the other part is kind of what we touched on earlier, Leila. It's just that empathy is just so big, is that taking the time to invest not just in the professional development of your employees, but in the personal development of your employees. And so I have the ability to coach both an executive and those that he leads at that executive level. And unanimously, what people say is, I want the leader of this organization to really show that they care about me as a person, to ask just simple things like, how's my day going? I think it really opens up people on an individual level, increases motivation, just increases that sense of belonging and connection that at the core is really what makes EQ so important in leadership.
Completely agree. Now, if anybody wants your services, where do they go? And how do they find your book?
Sure. So the book is performing really well on Amazon right now. Amazon's the best place, Emotional Intelligence for the Modern Leader. You can find it online at Barnes & Noble and Target. And then go to my website, chrisdconnors.com. You can easily find me on Google, Christopher D. Connors.
Perfect. Chris, thank you so much. Great conversation.
Thank you so much, Leila. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back in 2 minutes.